Hello, dreamers! I've been waiting to make this video for a while now, and I'm very excited to share this story with you. Today, we're going to take a look at my idea for a 3D pirate-themed platformer called the Outcast. I've already talked about the Outcast a bit in my last video, but I wanted to take the time to explain more about the characters, the world, and the story. The Outcast was an idea I had when I was around 13 or 14, mainly inspired by games like Sonic Rush Adventure, The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, and the Sly Cooper trilogy. As you sail island to island in the ocean-filled world, you can collect treasure, fill out your map, do quests to help people, as you go on your journey to stop Vincent's evil plans, who is creating these hostile environments and creatures by exploiting the waypoints, the last few remaining connections to the mystical Eldritch Realm. However, at the center of this story are two adoptive siblings, Sparky and Dara, living in a forgotten corner of the map called the Scrapyard, often having to go around doing odd jobs to survive. During one of these odd jobs, they steal an object called the Wayfinder from Vincent, an object he was using to locate the waypoints, and after learning this and the full extent of Vincent's nefarious plans, the two siblings vow to stop him, joining a pirate crew known as the Outcast, while having to outrun the bounty hunters that Vincent sent after them. However, when trying to come up with the themes I wanted to explore in the Outcast, I was mainly just bouncing between a bunch of words. Freedom, found family, self-discovery, but not being able to put them together in a coherent way. That was until I finally decided to ask myself the question I had been struggling with at the time. What makes an identity? And I figured there was no better way to answer that question than with a character who did not have one. The main character of the Outcast is Sparky, a character who I've simultaneously had the easiest and hardest time writing. Mainly because even though I took inspiration from a lot of other media, Sparky was mostly based off my own struggles with identity and learning how to make my own choices. And since he was first written while I was still figuring that out, he wouldn't end up having much of a voice until later rewrites. Sparky was found 10 years ago with amnesia by his later adoptive sister, Darlene, better known as Dara, in an alleyway. The two would take care of each other the best they could in the callous island of the unlovingly nicknamed the Scrapyard. But Dara would always be the main one taking the lead. Meanwhile, Sparky often struggled to make his own decisions, preferring to help others achieve their goal instead of what he wanted in life, of which he didn't really know. When asked, he'd usually just say he wants to find out who he was before amnesia, but in truth he didn't actually care as much about that as he thought. In reality, he hoped perhaps finding it would give him some kind of direction in life. However, after stealing the Wayfinder and joining the Outcast to stop Vincent, it becomes clear that Sparky, despite his timid nature, has the potential to be great all on his own without anyone else guiding him with his adventurous spirit and excellent recon skills. Something he must unwillingly embrace when Dara is kidnapped later in the story. Left without his main source of comfort and direction as he desperately tries to find her, Sparky is forced to learn how to make his own choices and be his own person without the help of his past or the people around him to help. With our main character out of the way, let's move on to the second half of the Outcast, Dara. Dara is the secondary main character of the Outcast, and where Sparky is a character with no idea who he is, Darlene is a character who knows exactly who she is and only recently given the chance to be that person. When designing Darlene, I've often made jokes that she's the problem child, mainly because though she hasn't been through the most redesigns, they have always been the most frustrating. Mainly because I know exactly what I want, but whenever I draw it, there's always just that one little thing that feels off. Even in this redesign, I had to go back and do the outline all over again because I realized I didn't like the original design. Coming from a strict home, many of Dara's traits and interests were suppressed in order to fit her family's picture-perfect vision. The last straw for Dara was when she overheard her parents talking about sending her to a boarding school in order to fix these traits of hers. She ran away from home to the Scrapyard where she would eventually meet Sparky, a boy who seemed unable to be anyone but himself even though he didn't know who that person was. Sparky was one of the few people she ever met who supported and loved her as herself and inspired her to let the masking habit slip. Despite this, she can often find herself falling back into old habits, which can make her emotions bottle up and come out in ways she hadn't intended, starting quite a few fights along the way, particularly with the quartermaster of the Outcast, Maelstrom, a man who, though unintentionally, can often remind her of her strict upbringing. However, despite her struggles, it becomes clear that Dara works best when she lets the mask drop and allows her to be herself, and let her analytical mind fly, easily being the best mechanic on the Outcast. After all, she did create her own prosthetic. I mean, what else says mechanical genius except having a gun for an arm? Speaking of guns, it's time to meet our marksman. From main antagonist to essentially the third main character of the series, I think Hotshot, even though he's not my favorite character, has always been my favorite character to write. And I've often found myself describing him as if Deadpool and the Cheshire Cat had a baby and lit it on fire. Out of all the characters, I think Az is the character that's changed the least in terms of personality. But in terms of design, he easily had the most drastic one. Because where Darlene had a bunch of small, very frustrating redesigns until I finally decided to scrap it and start over, Az is a character who mainly just had one big redesign, and that's because his original character was going to be a snake. His name was going to be Cheap Shot, and the whole idea was like he could mimic other people's powers. Obviously, that is not the design I went with. Later on, I just tried making him a cat. I can't remember why, but I ended up really liking it. And I ended up changing his name to Hotshot, because now he has fire powers, and you gotta respect the pun. Azar Pyre, better known as the top mercenary in the guild, Hotshot, was brought up in an abusive childhood in the Mafia by his father, where he learned how to be a marksman, although the men part was not very acknowledged. Azar would often sneak out to shooting ranges and clubs in order to escape his toxic environment, one of which he would meet his future boyfriend, Vox, who helped him discover his identity and showed him the love that he was never given by his family. He had also been the one to give him the nickname. It was enough to help him stand up against his father, who obviously didn't let him go so easily. Azar wouldn't find out until years later that his father faked his death to hide the fact that he was beaten by a wimpy little girl. After the fight, Azar ran away with Fox and joined him in the Mercenary Guild, his sharpshooting making him a great addition as he rose through the ranks quite quickly, until one day he was eventually hired by Professor Vincent to hunt down two thieves that had stolen something from him. However, despite their rocky relationship in the start, Azar would find himself getting attached to Sparky and Dara, which would lead to him eventually turning his back on Vincent. Though the fact he found out he wouldn't be getting paid helped a little. Azar would eventually become one of the siblings' most trusted allies, even helping Sparky hunt down Dara after she goes missing, proving himself to be a valuable member and marksman of the Outcast, no matter how punchable his face is, according to Dara. As you can probably tell, Az's main role in the story is comic relief, but also to give a new perspective, especially since, unlike the other characters, Az has already completed his character arc. Obviously, he later ends up deciding to change sides, but that doesn't really end up affecting his later identity, unlike his counterpart, which is the next character we're going to talk about. So in Sparky's segment, you may have noticed how I brought up that he did have amnesia, but it didn't really seem to affect his story that much. This is because Sparky's greater arc had to do more with making your own choices in life and becoming your own person, so it didn't really matter who he was before. But it would matter a lot to someone who knew him before amnesia. Enter Vox Hugin, or Vox for short. Vox grew up alongside Sparky in the Rift, basically an island in the middle of the sea with a giant portal connecting the Corporal Realm, the realm we spend the most time in, and the Eldritch Realm. Unfortunately, 10 years ago, the Rift was raided by enemy pirates, Fox used his powers to open a portal to the corporal realm and sent Sparky through it in order to protect him. In the aftermath of the raid, he would sail out to try and find Sparky again, joining the mercenary guild knowing they'd sent him all over the world in hopes of making his job easier. And even though he didn't find Sparky, he would meet his future boyfriend, Azar. He actually wouldn't find out about Sparky until years later when Azar invited him over for a celebration on the Outcast, where he would finally see Sparky again, and unfortunately learned that his little portal trip ended up with him slamming against the concrete and getting amnesia. Fox of course didn't take this well and tried to find a way to help Sparky's memories return, ignoring the fact that at this point in the story, Sparky had finally developed his own identity and wouldn't fit into a 10-year-old image that Vox still clings to. Vox throughout the story, with the help of Azar and many warnings from Dara, has to accept that amnesia or not, Sparky would not be the same person he was 10 years ago, and if he really wants to be friends with him again, it has to be with the person he is today, and not with the memory he was 10 years ago. I imagine that after Vox finally accepts the situation with Sparky, his little mini rivalry with Dara would also probably end. Actually, not just end, he'd probably just outright adopt her as like his utter pseudo best friend sibling after hearing everything she's been through. It would definitely be the kind of thing Az would tease him about all the time. Also, I know I didn't really talk about it, but I loved the dynamic between Az and Vox. The silly strict duo will always be a favorite of mine. Speaking of strict characters, we should probably move on to our next one. I think Maelstrom was actually the oldest character of the Outcast I made, though obviously back then he wasn't part of the Outcast yet. The first mate of the Outcast, Maelstrom Wayward, though well-meaning, can sometimes be very strict in his methods, still stuck in the belief forced upon him that everything needs to act and do things in a certain way, even after his time on the Outcast. Something that makes Captain Murdoch very hesitant to finally retire and hand him the reins. This attitude makes it so he often butts heads with the other members of the Outcast, particularly Dara. Dara, because he reminds her far too much of the strict environment where she came from, and Maelstrom because Dara reminds him far too much of himself, something he finally has to face halfway through the story, admitting to both her and himself that they have very similar upbringings which forced them to hide behind a mask. And it was unfair of him to force those same ways onto her, ending in him making a promise to himself and to her to be better. This choice would end up finally convincing Murdoch that he was ready to be captain, seeing his first mate was now more willing to adapt to what the individual crewmate needed instead of what he expected. Past that point, Maelstrom serves as a fatherly figure for both Sparky and Dara, even adopting the two siblings later on, similar to how Murdoch adopted him. Maelstrom can be very defensive of both his crew and his kids, especially when confronted by figures in his past. Figures that either still hold on to the mindset he once possessed, or figures that find it unfair how the outcast get the help that they were never offered. Despite this, Maelstrom still holds on to the belief that even though he can never make the world fair, he can make it better. For himself, for his crew, and most importantly, for his family. With my characters, I wanted to show a variety of experiences of people that can struggle when it comes to identity. And for Maelstrom, I wanted to show how those struggles could unfortunately pass on. Obviously, Maelstrom did not raise Sparky and Dara, but the premise of someone older who has been taught to act a certain way and teaching it to others, because that's what they were taught was acceptable, is unfortunately a very real experience for many people. People do not stop figuring out their identity after their formative years, despite all the "it's just a phase and you'll figure everything out when you get older." And I think Maelstrom is an important character to help the older audiences realize some of their faults and show that they could improve. If not for themselves, then for the people around them, as well as show that they too can seek help. Speaking of which, I think it's finally time to introduce our captain. Murdoch Wayward is the founder and captain of the Outcast. However, before that, he was originally the first mate of David Jones on The Flying Dutchman. A crew that would be the one to teach him the beliefs of identity and giving a place to those who do not belong. During their travels, the crew of the Dutchman would get caught in a storm while sailing through the Dead Sea, and crash land on the hidden island of the Rift, where they would meet and connect with the Eldritch living there, eventually forming an alliance and protecting the Rift together. Unfortunately, this would not last long, as they would be found by enemy pirates who raided the Rift and killed several Eldritch and Dutchmans, who fought them off while the others escaped into the Eldritch realm, breaking the portal that connected the worlds so the raiders could not follow them. Murdoch was one of the few pirates who would be taken prisoner instead of just killed. He would be kept in a small, dark cell for several years, until one day he finally broke out of his constraints and escaped back into the world. At first, he wandered aimlessly across the seas, no longer sure what to do with his life now that he no longer had his former crew. That was until one day he came across a young maelstrom. Seeing the young boy struggle to be accepted by both others and by himself, Murdoch realized the lessons he had learned on the Dutchman could still be helpful to the people of the day. So he would start the Outcast, creating a place where the people who felt othered by the world could come and improve themselves, with the help of people who could relate to them. He would see the chains on his wrist no longer as a sign of his imprisonment, but instead as a sign of his triumph. He would carry that on into the flag of the Outcast, to show his new crew that they too could break the chain, and be more than what the world forces them to be. He's much more easygoing than his first mate and adoptive son Maelstrom, but still reasonably cautious and wise, since he doesn't want anyone to get hurt the same way he has, and to give those who have a place to go. And those are the main 6 characters of the Outcast. I'm very proud of how each one turned out, and I'm glad you guys finally get to see them and learn their stories. Now that I think I finally don't have anything else to say, let's see the finished artwork. And that's the end of the video, everyone. I hope you enjoyed my little ramble about my characters. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I've been working on these guys for a while now, and I'm so happy to finally be sharing their stories with you all. A little word before I go, the Reverie Art website is officially live. I'll have a link in the description for you guys to check it out. It's going to be a more comprehensive way for you guys to follow my progress and stories. Right now, only the Outcast page is ready. Most of the information there is already in this video, but at some point I'm going to have a lot more stories for you guys to follow. Oh, and don't forget, I'm going to be coming to you soon in a couple of weeks at the Vancouver Art Festival from August 2nd to the 4th at Esteshore Park. We're going to be selling a bunch of Outcast stuff and a few general Reverie Art items like bags, stickers, coasters, keychains, and my personal favorite, this deck of custom tarot cards starring the characters of the Outcast. I can't wait to see you guys all there, and with that out of the way, have a good night, and keep on dreaming. Hi, thanks for watching until the end of the video. If you enjoyed or would like to see more content like this, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. For more frequent updates, please consider following my other social medias like Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, or Unveil. Until I see you next time, goodbye.